I know what you're thinking. What in the gosh darn is Bits and Bombs? Bits and Bombs is a podcast deep diving into what it takes to do stand-up from a different comedian every episode. Follow new open micer Peter Doms in his journey to be an okay comic.
I was in a store in Newtown, very progressive Sydney suburb, and on the wall of the store was a big sign, and the sign said, "Racism is not welcome here." And I saw it and I thought, it's a good thing they put that there. Because fuck was I ramping up. But then I saw the sign and thought, this is not the place. I was this close to breaking store policy. And I was so embarrassed, you know. My face was bright red. You couldn't tell. I painted it black. But...
All right. More housekeeping on this one. So I recorded this back in November. And it had been... like ages since I recorded the last one. I thought my camera batteries were charged, and it wasn't until right before Tom came over that I realized they were not charged, any of them. So there's no video for this one, which affects very minimal people. Most people listen to the audio anyway. But yeah, there's no video for this this week, this episode. Yeah, and then as of next week, it's all up to date-ish. I've started recording episodes in the last week or so, so yeah, they're all pretty current. In terms of, so Tom is actually, so just in terms of like what's coming up for Tom, he is now touring the show, his newest show that he speaks about in this episode, and he's going to places like Perth, very soon in February. We also have, New South Wales and places like that. Melbourne Comedy Festival. It's coming to Brisbane in May as well, and that can all be found. All the dates and tickets for that can be found TomWitcombe.com. And also, just one last thing is, if you could rate the podcast on the Spotify's, that would be appreciated. Thumbs up on YouTube, help the algorithm stuff. Yeah, cool. Cheers. So, Tom Witcombe,
that's me.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, when was your first gig?
My first gig was, I believe, September 2017.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I dated as. At the Magic Mike Comedy Club in Sydney, back when it was an open mic, not where it is now, down the road, a place called Monkey Magic. I think I don't even think I was on the lineup. It was one of those sort of, it was like an open mic, but it was curated. So it was, I don't know if you ever had this in your, how long have you been doing it for?
2.5 years.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if this still happens this way, because during COVID, everything changed. But when I started, the way a lot of the open mics kind of functioned was obviously you had your show up, put your name in the hat, and everyone gets on and whatever. There were a handful of those, and I always hated that. Like, I hated the waiting. I hated the, maybe there's 60 people there or 40 acts, and you could be on at 7 or you could be on at 11. I just didn't. I always had a job while I was doing comedy, so I never really liked the idea of just spending 4 hours at a pub and then having to get up at 8 a.m. the next day or whatever. But the way that would usually work for the others was there'd be like a Google form that would go live at a certain time. You'd put your name in, and then they would put the lineup up either like the morning of or the afternoon of the gig. And I remember filling out this form and waiting for the lineup to come up, and then my name wasn't on it, and I messaged Skinner, not that I know who Skinner was at the time, but I messaged like the Facebook group or whatever, and the Facebook page. And I was like, hey man, just checking, did I fill out the form correctly? Like, I thought I was meant to be on. And he's like, oh no, dude, I had 65 sign-ups. I'm only putting 20 comics on, which just blew my mind. I didn't realize how big the scale of it was to like 60 people trying to get up to do 4 minutes at an open mic. And then he was like, look, just come down. People drop out all the time, and if someone drops out, you can jump on. And I went there. A mate of mine came along, and I had my set ready and just kind of watched in the crowd. And he said, yep, you good. We'll put you on the second half. Lauren Bonner was emceeing. I remember that. And yeah, did that. And then my friend who came, the friend who came, he and I used to go to comedy a lot in Sydney. We used to go and just see open micy stuff just because we liked comedy a lot. And I think back then comedy it wasn't quite at that kind of third golden age or whatever that it's at now. It was still sort of niche. And we just bonded over it a lot. And he's just always since then taken a real interest in me doing comedy. And we used to talk about me doing it and stuff. And he came and supported. We went and got a beer afterwards. And I was just so giddy with how well I thought it went. And I think in hindsight, it went fine. I think I had the recording still for a long time. I went back and listened to it. I was like, this is okay.
Yeah.
Not even like, obviously the material's bad. But like, I thought the reaction at the time, I'm like, I did pretty well. And then you listen back, like, it's fine.
Yeah.
People were fine.
That being said, though, I guess like when you scale it to like first gig, for it to go well, like that's really well compared to what can happen for.
I always think
well.
I've heard people say this, and I think it's true that your first gig often goes better than your second gig because you're just all nervous energy, and I think a crowd can vibe that. I think a crowd can pick up on it, and you have no idea how it's going to go. There's an innocence to it. Whereas I think, especially if you do okay your first gig, I went into my second gig so fucking cocky. I thought I was God's gift to comedy. Just got absolutely just silence. And it was performing to comics. It was one of those open mics where it was all comics. My first one, at least, there was like crowd. This one was just all comics who I didn't know. And I'd watch like sort of, not industry, but like scene favorites go up first, who meant nothing to me. But Alan Rutledge, who was an excellent joke writer, but everyone loved Alan. And I remember him going up first and just like crushing because all the comics love Alan and they wanted to see him perform. And I think I went second or third, maybe even later, but I just bombed so hard. And I left really like angry. Like I was kind of mad about it.
Yeah.
So yes. No, I think first gig, I always tell people who are like, I've always thought about doing it or I want to bucket list it or whatever. I'm like, yeah, first gig tends to be good. Like I wouldn't be worried about your first gig. I'd be worried about your second gig.
Especially if you have a good MC as well, they'll most likely be like, this is his first time. Like,
sure.
And on your second gig, who gives a fuck? They're not going to be like, this is his second ever gig. Yeah. Like that's where you don't really have that buffer.
This is this guy's third week of comedy. Make sure you really support him. Yeah. He's only 6 months in and they don't give a fuck. Yeah, I think in an open mic, for the most part, the crowd sort of wants you to do well. Yeah. Because they're not paying anything to be there. They know what the deal is. And I think especially if you're like nervous, there's an endearingness to that. Whereas I think when people start paying to be there, there's suddenly a bit more entitlement of like, well, you owe me something. Yeah. Which could be good. I think at a professional or a semi-professional level is really good. But I think for like when it's open mic material and open mic acts and people who have not gigged much and who are bad, because they often are. Yeah. And people are paid to be there, there's a feeling of like, what the it doesn't feel fair, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like those things can also hurt the scene too, in the way of like, why would it kind of, I think it takes away trust from the, why, like they're not going to be as likely to go buy another ticket to a kind of local event.
There were some gigs in Sydney. The one I'm thinking of doesn't exist anymore, but it was like a long-running institution in Sydney where the tickets were like extravagantly expensive. The lineups were okay. There were always like decent acts on it, but there was a lot of shit on there too of people who just, would come and go and whatever. And I remember doing these gigs because it was just good stage time and seeing these audiences come into these like terrible venues, not just like terrible venues as in they weren't nice places to be whatever you were doing. If you were there for trivia or a schnitzel, it was not where you'd want to be. And sit in a room with like 7 other people to see mid-range acts who aren't getting paid to be there and just thinking, guys, I could have sent you to 4 other rooms tonight where you would have had a nice time. And instead, a lot of the time, especially in Sydney, it's like, who's been to comedy before? It's like less than half the crowd a lot of the time. So they just go, I guess this is what this is. Probably won't do that again. Whereas if you can send them to a good room or if they end up at a good room, especially something that's not too, I don't know, corporate, is that the right word? But industry, where it's a little bit more grassroots, just a little bit more independent. I think it can be a really cool scene to discover, I think, as a punter.
Yeah, I actually kind of one night did recommend, like I did a really rough open mic and I met the punters before the show and they were like, oh, we just come from England and like, this is our first ever comedy show. I love all the podcasts and all that shit. And after the gig, I was like, look, go to Good Chat. Like that's like, and and they were kind of like, oh no, don't put yourself. I'm like, no, I'm not putting myself down. I just mean it's more like the gig actually has an MC. There's like, it's an actual, like, if you want to experience comedy, I feel like that's the way to do it. Like,
yeah. No, it's true. And it's a weird thing, right? Because I find with friends and coworkers, especially when you're early on, they're like, tell me when you're doing a show next. And it's that thing of like, well, I'm doing a show in 4 hours, but you don't want to be there.
That's exactly my thing at the moment. Like, because I've started a new job where everyone's like, "Oh, we want to see you and stuff," and like, "Oh, let us know when your next gig is." Like, it's that same thing. It's like, I have one tonight, but I'm not telling you to come to that one.
And it could be great. Maybe it'll be full and be a packed house.
Yeah,
but I don't know, and I'm not willing to take the risk.
Yeah,
because there's nothing worse than doing a bad gig, or even just like doing a bad job in front of people you know.
Yeah,
you do it for long enough, you kind of get to the point where you're like, I can bomb in front of strangers. Like, I don't really care, because I get into my car and I go home and I go again tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Bombing in front of friends and the sort of like, oh, I thought you were great afterwards. It's just like, oh, I hate this so much.
Yeah, or like the good job kind of thing.
Yeah, it was good.
Oh, you're funny. I'm like, oh, yeah, thank you. But I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, we were all there. We all saw what happened. Yeah.
Or it wasn't that bad. Or
fuck, brutal. I remember after... And actually, did it? I'm trying to remember one of my Raw years, because I think I won or I run it up in every heat that I did at Raw, which always kind of gave me this false sense of promise of, well, I was the best on that night, therefore I'm a real hot chance or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if it was my... I think it must have been my second year in the state semi-final, that a friend that I didn't get through, and I was really bummed about it. I was really sad. I thought I'd done enough. And I remember being outside with a bunch of people, and everyone was like, "You did great." And that was one of those where "you did great" is still nice, because it's like, it's not really about who wins or whatever. Yeah. And then my friend's girlfriend, now his wife, said, "I thought you were the third funniest one." I was like, "Fuck you!" It made me so mad. I was like, I know myself well enough now where I'm like, I'm gonna get mad at you if I even look at you right now. So, okay.
I've also got that from a friend coming to the Raw state final. They were like, "Oh, I think you were like the third funniest."
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Thank you so much.
I mean, on the flip, I guess I appreciate the honesty, but it's like,
I didn't need quantification. Just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down.
A bronze medal.
100%. There's no podium there.
Yeah.
It does nothing for me. It's funny, because I had another friend who came to the first gig she saw me do a Raw, and then she came to just a random gig, and she's like, "So who won?" And I'm like, no. That doesn't always happen. That's just that one thing. So yeah, I think it feels like it's kind of, sometimes it's human nature to be like, this is a competition, right? Someone's winning, someone's losing.
I had the false kind of sense of stuff too because my sixth gig was like Raw Heat in Townsville, and then I won that, and they flew me to Brisbane for the state final. So I was kind of like, I guess like once I moved to Brisbane, I was like so humbled by just like going to the open mics. I'm like, oh, there's so many people way better than me.
100%. Yeah.
Like, but it's good, because that's where the actual like learning and getting better starts, is when you're like, oh, like I really need to work on getting better here. Yeah,
absolutely. I think you're right. Like, there are periods of time where you want to think that you're just already the best, like, which is ridiculous, because you just never, unless you've been doing it for 10 years, you're not even in the conversation, really.
Yep.
And obviously most people aren't in the conversation regardless, but you know what I mean? Like, even the greats wherever, they've been doing it at least 10 years. So for you to think 2 years in, like, I'm pretty fucking good at this, it's like, no, you're not. And we all think we're good at it. And at any point, we all think we're good, and then a year later we go, man, I was bad, but now I'm good. We all think, and then in hindsight, we're like, no, that was shit, but this time. I think when you start, I remember very, very early on, every gig, I was thinking, where was I tonight in the rankings? I think I was probably like third. This guy did better than me, and maybe she did. Oh, I was pretty close. Okay. And I would walk away from going that, and nights where you go, I was the best tonight. I reckon I was the best tonight. And then I think as you I think there was a big shift in my mindset when I stopped thinking about having good sets and started thinking about being a good comedian. And I think they're different things. I think what you want to get out of a set differs as you get on, where you can stop looking at them as single events and look at them as part of a bigger kind of tapestry.
Yep. Yeah, that's how I felt about like doing Adelaide Fringe, where I like we spent so much. You know how like expensive these festivals can be. Like I did split it with a friend, so I kind of cut that down. But
Did you do a split bill?
Yeah, split bill, and we did 3 nights. And like the first 2 nights were kind of like 6 people, 8 people. They loved it though, so it was a fun show. Last show we packed it like 30-seater, like 28 people. We're like, sick, this is great. They weren't into it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, my friend was upset, but I kind of was already like, oh, it's just a part of the journey. Like, I think I'm starting to have that kind of almost like retrospective kind of thing, like looking at it like as a greater kind of journey.
I think it's important. I think it's because I think we were talking before. I did my solo in Brisbane on Thursday night, and it's hard because your standards lift as time goes on. I think if I'd had that show 3 years ago, I'd be stoked in terms of response. And in terms of turnout, I was really happy. It was, I think, my biggest selling show outside of Sydney, which was really exciting.
Oh, awesome.
And there were some people there, and there were some people there to specifically see me, which is exciting, and that takes a while to get to. But you also, I walked away from it going, this bit didn't land, and that was kind of, this bit's got a lot of fat on it, and I didn't really close as strong as I'd have liked. I lost them there. You know, you kind of focus. There's a thing, I had a coworker who used to love, what's the name? It's like a personality testing thing. You know the one with all the numbers? Do you know the big personality tests and stuff, like Myers-Briggs and all that sort of...
Yeah.
There's one that's based on numbers. I can't remember what it's called, but some people love it. Anyway, there's one of these personalities called the discounter, and it's like some people, when they do a test, they get 95 out of 100, and they think about the 95 they got right, and some people think about the 5 they got wrong, and that's 100% me. Like and I think probably a lot of people as well. It's just like you don't focus on what you should be happy with. You focus on where you let yourself down.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's hard because it makes it an unwinnable game, because you walk away from everything going, oh, but this could have been better, as opposed to just enjoying the things that did go well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really tough. I think the mental game of comedy is really hard.
Yeah, and I guess there's also like there's never going to be a definite thing of like, because there's so many different like things that factor into certain things getting laughs. So some nights, like obviously like each night people are going to laugh differently to each joke and things land differently. So it's kind of really, especially in the early kind of gigs where you're getting like just 5 people and things, it's hard to determine what is working and what isn't.
Yeah, I think you get a better radar as you get more experienced, and it's not it's kind of an ineffable thing. You can't really express exactly what or why, but you get a better vibe for how to interpret a gig generally. What kind of gig is it? How are people doing? What are they liking? What aren't they liking?
Yeah.
And also, if things work or not work, why? You get a bit of a better vibe of like, the difference between did they not understand it? Were they offended by it? Did they see it coming? Yeah. I think as you get more into it, you start to be able to sort of pick up on those unspoken signals and cues from a crowd, which I think is really helpful, because at the start it's pure, you're just doing, it's kind of like any experiment, right, where you're just trying to work out input output. I said these words, they reacted that way, but you can't take account for people in the room, the MC, how they did, how the other acts have been doing. It's hard to account for everything when it's all feels so random. I think you just start to get enough data over time. Once you've done 1,000 gigs, where you go, okay, I reckon this might have been why it didn't work. I reckon this is why this did.
Yeah. Yeah. Like for me, like in my like first 2 years here, I feel like I'm just like, my main focus, like last 6 months, I've been doing pretty much the same kind of like 5 to 10 minute kind of set, depending on like the slot I get given. But like, yeah, I'm mostly just focused on like kind of tightening things up, word economy, and also just getting comfortable on stage. And I feel like really focusing on getting comfortable on stage this last, like, since the beginning of the year, I've been going from rough rooms and then getting like going back to like the good rooms and the clubs, and like, oh wow, like you've gotten so much better. And that's purely on just focusing on kind of working on timing and things like that too.
Yeah,
so,
for sure. I think it's again, it's another choice to make, right? Where now that I do festivals every year, or try to, and or at least have been able to for the last 4 years, 4 or 5, I like the blank slate. I like the pressure of having to have a new 50 minutes every year.
Yeah.
And I think what that has allowed me to do is make sure that my material always feels true to me at this moment. And sometimes I do find like there's a pressure when you have to do well, when you're getting paid or you're headlining or whatever, and you have to go back to the well a little bit where you go, I don't know if this is really me anymore, but I know it works. And then the counteract to that is once you do something enough, exactly to your point about once you know the rhythm and the timing and you're comfortable with the bit, there's real strength in that too, because you can kind of, you got a bit that has 4 or 5 sort of punchlines in it. You can kind of know by the end of the first punchline how the rest of it's going to go, and that's good data for the rest of the set as well. Yeah. I love that feeling. Like when you have a thing, if you got a bit that has maybe 4 punchlines in it, and you do the first one and it kills them, and you're like, fuck yeah, this is going to be great.
Yeah.
If you loved that, that's not even like the good bit. It's really nice to start to get those little indicators, I think.
Yeah, I've started to feel like recently too, where it's like they're laughing at things where like hard at things. I'm like, oh, usually doesn't get that, or like it's not that funny. Like, but then I kind of know that I've got them, and I'm like, oh, sick. The rest of this set's going to be a ripper.
Yeah, a thing that I love, which I don't know, I've never really reverse engineered to write this way, but when you kind of stumble across it, it's really great. Is if you can make the audience think you've done the punchline. Yeah. And then that's not the punchline. Like when they think it's not just, some audiences laugh at setups, which is just, they're just being, you almost can't take those audiences seriously, where it's just like they're here and they're having a nice time, but their response doesn't really mean as much because it's just like you actually shouldn't be laughing there. That's not really a thing.
Yeah.
But if you can do that thing where it's like you've done the setup, you say something, they think it's the punchline, even if they're kind of disappointed by it, or even if it doesn't go great.
Yeah.
To then kind of shock them with no, here's the thing.
Yeah.
That's quite a powerful position to be in.
Mm-hmm. How far along were you before you started doing like the festival shows and like your first like hour?
I think I did my first hour. It was pre-COVID, so it must have been 2019. Mm-hmm. So that means it was like kind of into my... That feels so early though. I'm trying to work that out because did I do one, or maybe it was all post-COVID? Let me work backwards. So I did this year, 2024, and then it was White Collar Dark Jokes. 2023 was Problematic. 2022 was Ignorant. I did one before that, which was called Amoral. So maybe it wasn't. Maybe I take that back. Maybe my first hour was 2021. That would make more sense.
Oh.
Maybe. Or was it like, yeah. Because I did a thing, I remember in 2020, because the festivals got cancelled, I did this thing called Laughs Out of Lockdown, which was a thing the Sydney Comedy Festival put on as a replacement for the festival. And I guess maybe that was like my trial for what would then be my first show in May. Yeah, that would probably make more sense. Maybe 2021.
Yeah, okay. That's still like 4 years in nearly. Like that's
I think I think I would say doing if depending on what you want to do, I would suggest doing hours in Australia. If you're gonna be in Australia and or even probably the UK for the first 10 years of your career or whatever, your pursuit of stand-up, I would recommend doing festival shows as soon as possible. Yeah. Because I don't think anyone's ever ready for the first one. I think the first one is always going to be filled with fat and, it's going to be hard to sell tickets and it's not going to be great, but it'll have good moments in it. If only for you, if not for everyone else. And I think it just gets you into the mindset of writing an hour of material, which is actually 50 minutes of material, which is actually 43 minutes of material.
And 7 of crowd work.
Yeah, exactly. Is important. And just knowing that's possible. Because I think all of the really, really successful Australian comics are the ones who just showed up at festivals every single year. Yeah. You look at like Muggleton and Heggie and like Reese Nicholson and Nick Cody and Becky Lucas, like all these people at the start of their career, they just showed up at festivals and they were there every single year. And then I think there's a whole bunch of intangibles like that gets you a bit ingratiated into the scene, which makes it easier to get spots. I think it also gets you more comfortable on stage. I know it's daunting. It was daunting for me. I remember the first few years being like, I'd love to do an hour. I don't know how I'm ever going to do it.
That's where I'm at the moment. I'm like, I don't know how I'm ever going to write enough material to fit an hour.
Yeah, I mean, Heggie is probably my favorite comedian in the country, and I'm just I was a fan before I ever did comedy, and then now to be like a semi-colleague is such a privilege. Like I appreciate that so much. But I remember him saying a thing of like, you just need to have a thing in the calendar, and you'll have to write. You'll write it because you have to. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Like if you wait until you're ready, you'll never do it. And I think once you have a commitment of and not just a commitment to yourself, but a dyed in the wall mark in the calendar, on this day I need to go and stand in front of people and talk for 50 minutes, you'll find a way. Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, in this scene, that's kind of the only way to do it, is by doing your own show at comedy festivals, at least to start with. It's not like in America where you can kind of make your way around the country just doing spots. You need... I think you need to be able to sell tickets, and you can only sell tickets if you have an hour of something to tell them. At least, in the more kind of traditional, obviously there are other kinds of shows you can do and things, and maybe you could do splits and showcases and that sort of stuff, but it looks to me as if all of the successful working comedians in Australia are the ones that are showing up at the festivals with an hour of stuff to say.
With your first show, did you have it fully written before, or like most of it written before?
Yeah, I am annoyingly rote. Like I wish I was looser on stage. I wish I could just go up there and just talk and be like, I have a thing to say. I never have. It's always been really, it's probably my biggest like criticism of my own stuff is I think it's overwritten. Like I think I spend so much time writing, and I'm trying to find a happy middle of that. But yeah, no, I could show you on my phone or on my laptop. I have Google Docs and spreadsheets of every stand-up comedy hour I've ever done. Of like this bit and this bit and this bit and this bit, and that becomes that chunk and whatever.
That's how my brain works too, and I think especially like facing the nerves of public speaking, for me the safety net was always having that rehearsed, and that's I feel like I do struggle with just like the being present side of gigs. Yeah. Like, especially like someone will say something, like a heckler will say a retort, and then like, it's like kind of that thing later, I'm like, fuck, I should have said this or whatever. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. And especially if you're not a person who... There are some people who naturally, that was all they ever did, was get up with a thing that they thought earlier that day and then try to tell them. And people, they trust that in that moment, they will... I think some people like the pressure that they're put under in front of people. They actually use that as an advantage of, well, your brain better catch you before you fall. Yeah. But no, I've always been super, super written. I think because at the start I started off just doing one-liners, and there's a real safety in that, of knowing that a joke is coming, and knowing that I think one-liners as well, like there's a mechanical reason to laugh. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't have to agree with me, or you don't have to like empathize with me. You just need to see the kind of the chemistry of it all, or the equation play out. Like I thought you were talking about this, but you're actually talking about that, and like the release of that. But I'm very envious of the people who can go up and just sort of riff. I think I'm getting better at it, but I only do it if a thing happens. If someone yells something out or something happens in the room, I don't really seek it out. But yeah, I would like to.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, when people like, when something happens in the room or someone yells something out and then I like respond to it and then it gets big laughter, I'm kind of like, fuck, that felt really good. I need to do more of that, but I don't seek it.
Yeah. I remember hearing Andrew Schultz on a podcast talk about crowd work, because it was when he was really kicking off, when his crowd work clips were going nuts, because he was one of the guys at the forefront of that. Yeah. And I think every comedian has, at the moment, like, amateurish comedians go, well, should I be trying to get crowd work clips? Is that the thing to do? That seems to be what works. Yeah. And he said, I've just always been that guy who's wanted to talk to people. Like if I'm checking in at the hotel, I want to ask the receptionist how their day was. If I'm in an Uber, I want to ask where he's from. I'm like, I don't give a fuck about that. I don't care at all. And like not in a rude way, but it's just like I like to stick to myself. I don't care what you do for a living or how long you've been together. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so to ask would be disingenuous, and all I'm ever doing is like searching for a joke to tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's nice to know that when things happen, you are quick enough on your feet to react. Mm-hmm. I also think, now that I do this podcast with Dan and Hamo at Flog Cabin, like I've always been very self-conscious of like, am I funny or do I just know how to write jokes? Because they're not the same thing really. Like I said, I do think writing jokes can be very mechanical and very mathematical. Mm-hmm. And I probably was when I started. I was that way. And just being able to like sit with them with no plan and just talk shit and be funny, it's given me so much more confidence. Like, okay, no, I can be funny off the cuff.
Yeah.
That's and I think I've brought a little bit of that to the stage, but I'd probably like to bring more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. And and with the festival and stuff, like, what's your timeline? Do you have like a structure and like timeline of like, okay, I guess like. That's by what I can tell. That's what like the fringes are for, right? So first half of the year is like Adelaide Fringe, but also like Melbourne Comedy Festival, things like that, and Sydney Comedy Festival. And then towards the second half is more like the fringes of the other cities, like the smaller festivals that people do the trial shows at.
Sydney Fringe is September, I think. I think I've only once done the thing of like wrapped up in May and then done a trial in September. I think it's probably a good thing to do. I'm doing a trial in Sydney in last week of November, which I think is probably like just nice to get a bit more time, because then you got 6 months to kind of write stuff and have stuff to show. I think I'd really be racing to be ready. But actually, no, I've done stuff. Usually when I've done Fringe, I've tried to do like split bills or something. But even that I don't find is as useful as like, again, having an hour to fill. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, like I'm a little bit anal about it. Last year I was doing like a work course that took up a lot of my time in like June, July, August. So I felt really late to things. So I only really started writing a lot for my show September, October, and then I think I did a trial in like Feb, and then I didn't do Adelaide, but I did Melbourne, I did Sydney. And I think my show last year, like, I was not, because I did it this week at Brisbane, and I do think there's parts of it I really like, but then I was sort of like, there is quite a bit of fat here. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a lot of stuff where I'm like, this isn't really good enough, but I need an hour, so it'll just have to be there, and I'll just have to like try and support everything around it. And it's like anything, if there's enough momentum in the room, you can cruise through those moments, and you can maybe sell them with enough charisma or enough, and especially I think when you've just been doing it a lot. But this year, I really am putting a lot of emphasis on the show and just trying to make it as good as it can possibly be. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm trying to work out now. So what are we? It's November now. I've been writing pretty consistently from sort of as the festivals were wrapping up. I was trying to write stuff, but just keep it in the back pocket. So now I feel like I have like kind of 6 or 7 sort of keystone bits that I sort of think like, okay, this is a big thing. This is a big thing. For the first time, I have a story-ish that I kind of want to tell that I'm trying to base the show around if I can, which I really like. I think I probably should just do. Like, I think I should just find a way to do it, because otherwise I'll find excuses not to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, I'll do my trial end of November, which will just be like, here are all the bits. What do we think? How does it feel on stage? And just sort of like work out what's working, what isn't, and then kind of build around that. I think, Louis C.K. talks about writing comedy being like a samurai sword, right? Where you construct the first thing, and then you have one version of the sword, and you fold it in on itself, and you harden it out, and then you do that again and again and again. Like, I think it's that constant process of writing, trialing, trimming, writing, trialing, trimming, and just trying to get everything as sharp as it can be. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's a very long-winded answer. I'm thinking Sydney Comedy Festival, which is in May. I don't do Edinburgh, so I don't have to worry about that. I kind of try and put that show on the back burner immediately, where it's just like, okay, that's done. Mm-hmm. Start writing and start trialing. Try in Sydney gigs that I don't feel an obligation to do well, like when I'm not getting paid or whatever. Try and do as much new as physically possible. Start to build your new kind of reservoir of what jokes you're doing this year. Try and have something of a show skeleton by the end of the year. And then, then it's just about kind of like trying to pull it together by whatever your first gig is. I'm doing Perth Fringe next year for the first time. That'll be in Feb. And then for me, Sydney's the... Comedy kind of works in seasons, right? Like you sort of have pre-season is sort of like June, July, and then it's kind of like you have the regular season up until festivals, and then you're in finals. And I kind of think of Sydney as like the grand final. Like I'm playing at home. It's where it should be its best. It's where I want it to go the best. It's where the crowds will be the biggest, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sweet. With the... So I'm going back to, I think it was like last year or the year before, I showed you something like a set I did once, to get some advice. And I had a joke about, it was like basically the whole like reveal, and it's my dad kind of thing. Which is like, at the time I didn't realize there's such like a overdone kind of thing that newer comics do.
Yeah.
What are some other... I don't know. I'd just be interested to hear like what are like your advice for new comics with material and things like that, and things to maybe like avoid to stand out and not kind of fall within like more like just hack kind of material, I guess.
I think as soon as you start seeing or hearing stuff in other people's sets that's familiar to your own, that should be a red flag. I think the biggest thing, if you're new, do whatever you need to do to get your time up. Like, fuck, you don't worry about being hack when you're 6 months in, because no matter how much you worry about it, you probably will be, because we all are.
Yeah.
And like, fuck, in a world where, I mean, how many memes are there? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just everyone is making content all the time. And even if it's not a stand-up comedian, there's probably some guy who's made a meme or some person who's done a thing on TikTok or whatever. So I would say, like, don't worry about being hack as much as I would say. Pay attention to the little kind of radar inside of you when something feels like you. When it's like, that feels more like what I want to do. Like, that feels right. I think it's kind of ineffable. Like, you kind of know it when you see it a bit. So I think paying attention to the times where like, this feels different. I don't think I've heard someone say this before and it feels like something. I think the closer you can get to telling jokes that only you can say, which is such a high bar. Like, I don't know how achievable that is for everyone, but I think if you look at the great comedians in this country, I always say this I say about Damo and I say about Heggie, where it's like, if you want what they are selling, they're the only guys selling it. You can't see anyone else doing Heggie. You have to see Heggie doing Heggie. And I think other comedians, you see certain jokes and you go, I reckon just about anyone could tell that and it would still work. Whereas I think the more that your voice and your perspective is inherent in the joke, the more that it's going to be unique. Right, just inherent. I mean, I don't know if that's a tautology. It might not be particularly groundbreaking to say, but just the more that it can come from a place of this is uniquely of my experience or my my life, my perspective. I don't know if that's like kind of a self-fulfilling answer, because it's like, how do you be unique? By being unique, but you know what I mean. Because I like a lot of my jokes is just like comes from like stories I'd tell people. At like just funny stories of things that happen to me that I'd tell people at the pub or whatever, and then just now this needs to be a joke. And I think that's a good way to avoid kind of I guess having it sound like any other for sure
kind of person out there.
I think in terms of actually, because that was maybe not great advice and it's not very practical. Practically, what I would say is write as much as possible. As soon as you hear something in your act or in someone else's that sounds familiar, drop it. As best you can. Like, again, sometimes you need the time, so you need to hold on to it. But for the most part, if someone else has it, it doesn't matter if you had it first, really, unless they've blanketly stolen it from you, which I don't think happens that much. If someone else has it, it just means it's probably not unique enough to be that good. So I would say, and then it's just like just trying stuff, especially when you're early on. The stakes are so low. I think that's something I'm kind of trying to deal with now. Is now that I get paid for work a little bit more, where it's like, well, now there's an obligation for me to do well because I'm doing a job. I'm not just trying stuff. I think when you have the freedom of like, this doesn't need to go well, either because it's an open mic or the room booker trusts you or whatever, where you just have that goodwill. I think it's important to make the most of it.
Especially like, I guess like for somewhere like Brisbane, like where there's less industry eyes, it's probably like a good playground here to just mess around and throw things at the wall too.
I guess so, yeah. I don't know. I don't really like. I'm not really familiar of like industry eyes in Sydney. I'm sure they are. It's that's a funny thing too, right? Like I think a lot of us love the idea of the industry picking us up.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would love it. I don't know whether people would expect me to with the act that I do, but fuck, I want to be on Taskmaster for sure. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I'd like to.
Yeah, definitely. It is funny how, like, I feel like there is almost to, like everyone will make fun of, like, the project and all that stuff, but, like, we'll all take it within 100%. A heartbeat. Like,
yeah. It's, what's the, like, it's not a value if it doesn't cost you anything. It's like, it's very easy to diminish people for, like, selling out or whatever, but until you've been in a position to turn it down, you just like, who cares? Yeah,
it's kind of like how a lot of like open micers shit on like the cruises and stuff, and it's like,
yeah,
it's a fucking pay gig.
Yeah, one of you is doing comedy for a living, the other one is at an open mic.
Yeah.
I don't know, if you don't want to do it, that's fine, but there aren't that many ways to make a career in comedy in this country, and cruises is one of them, and it's a skill set, and those guys crush. It's like it's something that people are willing to pay for. It's not what I want to do, but fuck, you know. I think the longer you're in comedy, I think comedy does. I did a little bit of jiu-jitsu before I did comedy, because you're not gonna believe this. I listened to the Joe Rogan Experience, and
no way.
Yeah, I know. Have you heard of it? It's good. It's good. But it was when I was into martial arts, like there was always this narrative about how like it's so humbling because you're always going to meet people who are better than you and you're going to get your ass kicked from time to time. I think comedy's similar. I think it's very easy to be snarky and shitty when you've been doing it for a year and no one gives a fuck.
Yeah.
I think once you've been doing it for 10 years and people see that you've been doing it for a long amount of time as well, it's just like, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to stick around with. I think, you know, anyone who's doing it, full respect. Even if I hate your act, I still like respect you for doing it.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Actually, like when I first started, the people that were only like a year further in than me were probably more standoffish than the people who were doing it for 10 years. They were always the ones that were like the most welcoming to the scene.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? Yeah. I think there's a real in-group, out-group thing in anything though.
Yeah.
But definitely in comedy. And I think comedy attracts outsiders as well. And I think that a lot of people kind of maybe have a bit of a chip on their shoulder at the start. But yeah, I do think it's humbling. And you're right. Like I think most of the really great comics that I've met have been really, really lovely people at every level. And I think you just hear less regrets about meeting your heroes in comedy, I think, than a lot of other pursuits.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've met I can't even think of one person where I was like, I met them and I was like, oh, like that's like, you know what I mean? Like I feel like you hear a lot more in like the movie industry and things like that. But comedy, I feel like for the most part, what you see on stage is what you get, I feel.
Yeah, I think it's for sure. And I think that's because doing it well is actually being yourself on stage. Like it's about knowing who you are and communicating that. I don't think it's not very often that people are successful by playing a character that they have nothing in common with.
Yeah. Also as well, so you have like 2 specials on YouTube, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. How far along were you when you started like planning like the first special, for example?
First special was my 2022 show. Does that make sense? What is it? 2024? Yeah. Excuse me. I don't know how much I was really thinking ahead at that point. I mean, it was about the time I remember. So Dan Muggleton's been a huge influence on me in all parts of my life, but in comedy especially. But now we've become very good mates, and that was because I opened up for him for a long time, and he was very early in the world of recording stuff and putting stuff out. And so I remember doing his show, The Running Joke, in Sydney, and that was one of the first shows in Sydney where getting your footage was part of the deal, where you could actually, he kind of traded your fee for your footage. And I, started putting clips out off of that. And so I think that was sort of the beginning. I was not particularly early into it, but I remember those early days when people were trying to work out how to clip stuff up, and not everyone was doing it. And now it's kind of feels like it's bread and butter. Like you kind of have to, if you're trying to convince anyone to come and see you, which you don't always. Not everyone has to do that, especially early on. But putting clips out feels like a bit of a non-negotiable. And so I think that was probably early on when I'm thinking, well, I'm trying to get clips here and there. I'm trying to get stuff recorded at the gigs that can. If I can get a whole hour of stuff in front of a crowd that are there to see me, that's probably going to come across a little bit better than, at random pub gig. I mean, there's definitely those times where you go and you're like, oh, great, they've got a camera filming tonight, and it eats shit. And you're like, well, I'm not going to use any of that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what I expected from it. I don't know if I had really high expectations. I think I timed that first one quite well, where YouTube specials were definitely a thing. It's kind of the time around when like Gillis put his out there, and Mark Norman and Sam Morrell. And for me, it's not like it wasn't going anywhere else. I had a friend who was a videographer who I used to work with, who just, actually, no, that's right. I was still working at this company. Was I still working there? Or I just left. And at this company, they had a videographer and they had like 4K cameras or whatever. And I knew my boss and I were on really good terms. I was like, hey, could I borrow those cameras to do this thing? And yeah, she just I thought she did a really great job. She filmed it all and mixed it all together, chucked it on YouTube, and then it just kind of like it did pretty well on the algorithm as far as those go. I think it's so close to 100,000 views. I just want to tick it over, even though those metrics don't really. There's no difference between 100,000 and 99,000 really, but I will be glad when it finally gets over that milestone. That'll be nice. But it's funny because, so that was cool. And it's always nice when, strangers are watching the thing, and that's what YouTube gets you access to, pure strangers. They were watching it, and they seemed to like it, and left nice comments, and that was really great. And I was quite proud of that, especially at the time. And, that I was very happy with that. And then a year later, I recorded my show a year later, and there were some issues in the video recording. The sound didn't come out quite how I'd like it. One of the cameras cut out. Like, filming stuff's a pain in the ass. Like, it's just, we were talking before about recording a podcast. It's just so easy for things to collapse. And if they do, you've got no backup. Like, you're kind of fucked because it's live. And you want to get your best show. So you're just hoping the crowd goes well and whatever. Anyway, so there was a lot of delays in getting that into a position where I was willing to put it out. And even when I put it out, like, the sound wasn't great. I wasn't super happy with it, but I was like, you know what? I really like the bits. I think it looks pretty good. Why not put it out? And it's funny because I put it on YouTube, and you get all those metrics in YouTube of like click-through rates, or how many people are clicking on the link in the side of the search bar or discovery bar, and like average view time. And in theory, from what I understand, that's what should dictate how well the video does. And more people were clicking on it, and I think they were watching as long, if not longer, as my first one, and it got 20% the views. And it's just like, I don't know. The media landscape is so saturated right now. There's so many YouTube specials and so many, Netflix, YouTube, Prime, whatever, in amongst everything else of like online content and podcasts. And fuck, it's so hard to cut through. It's really, really tough.
Yeah, I feel like every other week I'm seeing like a new YouTube special. Like, I think that's kind of I think you did get in a good time, because I feel like I didn't really see as many specials go to YouTube. Like, it was still, I think, that mindset of like Netflix was a special place.
Yeah, I think it was. You look at the Australian internet guys of Frenchie and Neil Kohak or whatever. They've been putting this stuff on YouTube for ages. Like, it's obviously always been the platform for self-release.
Yep.
But yeah, now it's really tough. And if you can you see great comedians put stuff out, and they don't always go great. They just don't catch fire for whatever reason. I think especially YouTube is such an international platform. You're sort of relying on the algorithm, not your fan base. Like the people who watched my first special, most of them are in America. Like, I put it out at a nice time in terms of getting the number, but I don't think it's really done anything for my career. It's nice to have that as a little point, proof point of like, why should I go see this guy? It's like, oh look, 100,000 people watch this thing. He must be okay.
It's definitely something like as a like part of your comedy resume and stuff.
Resume
like that
for
too,
sure.
Yeah.
It's a good way to put it. But yeah, I think like in terms of tangible outcomes, I don't think I've sold many more tickets the next year afterwards or anything like that. So it's it's hard. I think, unless you're like a social media sensation, like an Andrew Hamilton, fuck that guy. It's a slow burn. I think it's a slow accrual of people over time. Try to sell a few more tickets this year than the year before, and onwards and upwards.
And do you have any plans? Like, is it now? Are you on the rotation of? Because your second special was the show the next year, right? So like, is that now part of the rotation where it's like, okay, festival show, record it, publish it? Like,
I recorded this year. My Sydney Comedy Festival venue this year I wasn't very happy with. It was a bit of a weird one, and so the shows didn't go as well as I'd have liked. They still went okay, but they just didn't get big crowd reactions. So I filmed those, but I'm not going to put them out. And then I filmed another one in like a smaller venue, and I might put it behind not like a paywall, but I might like give it as part of a mailing list or something, just because I've got it. But again, like it was okay. I'm not... In all honesty, I'm not as proud of that show as I was the two before. I think it was a step up in like development and performance for me, but I don't. It's not something that I'm passionate about getting out to the world. But I think this next hour, I really want to just sweat it a lot. I'm very, very driven by it. I don't really, for whatever reason, this one, I just really want to get it right. I really want to be proud of every minute of it, and I think that means that I'll probably want to have a video record of it and have it somewhere, because I think at the end of the day, like, it's the only thing that makes what we do not transient, where because it all takes place in a room, and once it's over, it's over. If it doesn't exist somewhere, it's kind of like it's all, just drawings in the sand or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it's also just that cool thing, like, for family and even just people that might have been at that show at that time. Oh, remember like that time that show happened? They're able to, like, it's that kind of like you're leaving like that box of like photos or whatever. Like there's like little like nice.
I agree. The biggest one for me doing the Raw final, because I remember watching those videos on YouTube of people like of those sets that people were doing. Yeah. And I always thought that's the thing that my children will watch one day. And it's like, if I never, I remember thinking specifically then, like, if I never do it ever again, I will always have that of like me on a professional setup, professionally filmed in front of a massive crowd. So yeah, I think those little like kind of time capsule moments are important.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, back to what we were speaking about before recording. So you said last night you had someone walk out? Yeah.
I was headlining at Good Chat. This was like almost kind of masterful. I almost have to respect it. I was headlining at Good Chat, and like, if anyone's kind of seen my act, like it's divisive for sure, and I think I've gotten better over time of it being clear my intention, where it's like I'm kind of saying things that are deliberately fucked, knowing that they're fucked, which I think is a different thing. Sorry, I'm assuming I'm allowed to swear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you kind of just, it's hard whenever you do that sort of stuff. You're like, I really hope everyone here knows my intention is right, and that actually my opinions are probably diametrically opposed to what I'm actually saying. And the joke is that, like, hopefully it's irony. Fucking me explaining irony on a podcast. Jesus. But yes, anyway, I think whenever you're like a quote unquote edgy comedian, which is a label I despise, but I can't really argue against it, you risk people taking it the wrong way. Woman in the crowd, just, you just look at her. She's just like not my audience 100%. Young woman, lots of tattoos, kind of alternative looking. And I was trying to even work out, I don't even know what the joke was that kind of set her off. Because I don't really think, I didn't really start with stuff that I thought was that offensive. And she started laughing sarcastically. She would go, especially if there was a lull, she'd go, ha! And I was like, she did it once, and I was like, I don't know if I believe that laugh. I said it in the crowd, and people kind of laughed. And then she didn't really say anything else. I did another joke, and she did it again. And then that kind of the crowd would kind of laugh when she did it because it became a bit of a thing. And then she kept doing it, and then she kept hamming it up more and more to like make it more extreme, to make it more clear she was being sarcastic. And I kind of had to just be like, look, are you going to do this the entire time? And she was like, maybe. And I'm like, okay, well, you can't do this the entire time because you're really kind of messing up all the momentum. So if you're going to keep doing that, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And she's like, why? What's wrong? All I'm doing is laughing. Nothing wrong with laughing, is there? Yeah. And anyway, it was just very tense. And it was just like, it was one of those things where I think when there's any kind of heckler in a crowd, it can be hard to know as a comic, like, what the crowd thinks is happening. Because sometimes the crowd can be on her side. Like, for all I know, the crowd's like, no, you are being offensive. We're all kind of hating this. Or we don't think what she's doing is that bad. But when I kind of said, look, if you keep doing this, you're going to have to leave. And she goes, why? And I said to the rest of the crowd, like, sorry, does everyone else kind of agree that if she's going to keep doing this, she's going to have to go? And then round of applause. And you go, okay, we're all on the same page. This isn't working for us. You are interrupting this for everybody else. And then I think, not even intentionally, I think I was just going along with my set, but I think probably the next joke I did was probably quite, deliberately offensive and was sort of like kind of about women, but not really. I have a joke. I go, I went to an all-boys private school, and she goes, oh, what a surprise. And I'm like, do you think I might be going somewhere with this? Do you know what I mean? Like, you think I just bring this up because I'm bragging to you? You don't think I'm maybe going to be self-deprecating or something? Anyway, the joke is that my mum worries sending me to an all-boys school might have undermined my respect for women. And on the one hand, maybe she has a point, but on the other hand, who the fuck asked her? And hopefully people hear it and go, oh, irony, I get it. She didn't get it. She got up. She said, this is disgusting. You're disgusting. And she got up and stormed out. And I tried to handle it. I just did not try to like kind of villainize her or whatever. I was just like, thank you for leaving. This is the right call. And then sort of made the joke of like what a huge relief that all is. And you just kind of feel in the room, everyone was very glad that she was gone. But it's still like, it's tense and it's weird and it's uncomfortable. Like, I don't delight in those sorts of interactions. And then, I don't know, Jake said he spoke to her after the show. Like, when she left, he kind of caught her. I was like, hey, what's going on? And it seemed like she's, I don't know when this is coming out, but it's the second week of November. There was a big US political election on Wednesday. I think certain groups of people didn't, that has not been great news for them, and they feel probably persecuted by that. I think especially women. I'm not as familiar with this, but I hear state elections or city elections in Brisbane or Queensland went a certain way, and I think that has been, look, it's been a fucking, I don't know, I feel like people might be surprised, especially for the person I am on stage, for me to say this, but it's like, I didn't delight on Wednesday. I was doom scrolling. I wasn't feeling great about it. So I think it was just like the context of everything. She wasn't in a great space. And then you see a guy on stage wearing a suit and a tie who's clearly from a private school telling jokes about women and refugees or whatever and just taking it at face value. That was kind of how it went. I think it all ended up fine. But yeah, they're not great moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, like, do you have interactions like that? Was that like, have you had many interactions like that before?
No, not that many. Handful, like they're not like, they don't never happen, but I reckon they'd happen like maybe 2 or 3 times a year sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they're always embarrassing for me. Like, I find them like really shameful. Not as in I don't think I've done anything wrong, but I don't feel good about it.
Yeah.
I had a really bad set, I don't know if it was 12 months ago, 18 months ago, where I was closing a half and I was trying to do new stuff. And it's always the way, like, whenever you kind of are a bit, you do offensive stuff, you kind of forget, like when you're writing in a notebook and no one's there interacting with you, you kind of forget that people don't have the context of what you're trying to do or who you are. and you say it on stage for the first time, you go, oh shit, I can see why this is so confronting for certain people.
Yeah.
And I was just doing all new, and I just kept digging myself into a deeper hole, and there was a big group of people who were just super unimpressed, and they just hated me. Like, they really hated me because they thought I was there trying to make a point. And I felt awful for like days, not like I can't get out of bed or whatever, but just embarrassing. And you do it in front of your peers, and you don't delight in hurting anyone's feelings. That's not the point.
Yeah.
It sucks. I really don't like it.
Yeah, I think that's like the difference between like what you do and then what, like, I guess, even like, especially like at open mic level, you get a lot of people that are just trying to say the shocking thing, where with you, you're trying to like, there's irony, and you're also just like, you're also just doing a spin on it. There's like a twist to it and things like that. And I feel like sometimes people just hear even just certain words, or they're like, oh, he can't talk about that topic, but they're looking at it very face value.
Yeah.
Like, and they're not really listening to actually what you're saying or how you're trying to go about it.
For sure.
Like,
100%. And I think when you look a certain way, people, there's a bit of confirmation bias of like, well, he looks like the kind of guy who would think this or say that. So I think there's that element to it. And I don't know. When I started off, I feel like I've had to air off the stink of the kind of person who said edgy things for the sake of saying edgy things. I also think I probably leaned into like quite misogynistic stuff early, and I can see it wasn't all that I did, but I can see how people got caught up on that stuff. So I try really hard not to do that anymore and try to stay away from it. I grew up loving Jim Jeffries. Jim Jeffries was like my favorite comedian when I was 18 years old. And I do think like a lot of that stuff, like the joke of, isn't this a ridiculous thing to say, is very funny. But I can also see how it's like, it's risky. You have to accept the risk of that, because you benefit from the controversy not in like an Isaac Butterfield, like you become the bad boy of comedy or whatever, but saying something edgy and offensive, people do it because it gets a big reaction, and that's what you're looking for, and it's kind of a cheat in that way. And then you need to you make your bed and you lie in it when people get upset or when it goes against you. It's sort of the deal with the devil of it all. But yeah, I mean, my intention is only ever to be like, either point out hypocrisy in myself or in other people, or to call out like the ridiculousness of certain things, whether even if they are kind of edgy topics. Like I think you look at Jeselnik. Jeselnik has this great quote about art is getting away with it. I think he's quoting Andy Warhol, but he talks about it a lot. Art is getting away with it. And his thing is like, when people get cancelled or whatever, it's like, well, you're not getting away with it. Like that, you the way that you did it didn't work. I think the way that he kind of combats that to me is like by being so absurd, where it clearly he's on stage talking about being a mass murderer. We're all on the same page. This is a joke, because it's just so beyond the world that we live in. I think that's probably a thing that for comics who might want to do that, say the offensive thing, whatever, I think that's probably what you need to do, is take it to places that are so absurd and ridiculous that no one can take it seriously.
Yeah, and build like maybe like a character in a way where it's like, that's a non-threatening, goofy guy. Like, why would he, like, it's kind of like there's not that threatening level there.
Yes.
So like they're not offended, because like, oh, that's like where if it's someone that they're genuinely threatened by, it's going to trigger that fight or flight kind of.
Or even the thing of like, this is not a person I can judge by real world standards, because he doesn't live in the real world. Yeah. Anthony Jeselnik on stage does not exist on this world with the rest of us. It's like, watching a horror movie and judging Mike Myers by the rules of that we live by every day. It's like he lives in a different thing entirely. So I think the more that you can make that clear, but it's hard, because this is the other thing, right? I was talking to Jake about this today, about the experience last night. People don't know what comedy is in this country all the time. Like, they're kind of learning as they're watching it. Yeah. And comedy can be someone speaking their truth. Comedy can be someone telling you about their life and giving you intimate details about who they are. Comedy can be like trying to change people's minds about a political issue or a topic. Or it can be saying a fucked thing because you think it's a funny thing to say. And sometimes on the same night, you will see 6 different comments doing each of those things. Yep. And so it can be hard to know, like, well, what are you marking each comic against? What are you expecting from each of them? Because the rules keep changing. Yeah. So I think it's hard. I think it's tough. So I totally see how it happens. And I think I think the more I reflect on last night, it's like there's a lesson in it for me. It's like, well, how do I stop that from happening? Like, how do I make it undeniable to any crowd member that this isn't stuff they should be taking seriously? Because until I've done that, I haven't done my job properly.
Or even a way to like defuse like when you see the early stages of it happening, a way to not explain but also kind of get her on, like make her understand that this is a character.
Yeah.
But maybe in a way that it's not straight, just be like, I'm just like, it's just jokes. I don't know. Like,
it's the fucking worst. It's just jokes, guys. Oh God.
It's just jokes, guys. Yeah.
The absolute pits. That sucks. I hate that so much. That you talked about before, like I kind of sidestepped the question because I didn't want to be a prick about it, but it's like, what you shouldn't do. Thanks, Dad is terrible.
Yeah.
Turns out I was in public the whole time. Then I got off the bus. That sucks. Don't do that. One that, and I do it, but I would highly recommend people stop doing it. And I'm going to try and stop doing it. Is that's the line, is it? People use that a lot. That sucks.
Yeah.
It's like, and then also, thought that would work. Nah, those are all lines that frustrate me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of... I love those people that say that's a new one like 4 times.
I hate that so much. I hate... a lot of people do it. Whatever. I get the argument for doing it. If you're going to go on stage and be like, I just want to try some stuff. That's all I wanted to try. This is all new. Who cares? They don't... What?
It also in a way, even subliminally... shows like a disrespect to the audience's time.
100%.
Like,
because it's paid to be there.
Yeah. Especially if it's just like, oh, okay, like, oh yeah, you guys are just like my tester crowd for when I get a good. Yeah, it's.
And I think it undermines the joke as well because I think the idea of the comic is, they're going to give me brownie points because I didn't have confidence in it. So when it's good, they're going to be surprised by it. But to me, it's also like, I guess I won't expect very much of this then. Like, I guess this won't be very good. He's told me it's just new, so I guess it's not going to be any decent.
It's literally this is a first time comic, but for a joke, really. It's just kind of getting the crowd to be like, oh, okay, I'll be friendlier about this and
it's a total defense mechanism. It's the comedian trying to be like, well, here's why this isn't going well, or here's why this won't go well.
Yeah,
which is worse actually. When you preempt, here's why this isn't going to work. It's like, well, it won't work now because you've told them it won't. Because I think I've heard people talk about savers or whatever, and I think I've got versions of that, but I just think it's like try and be something a bit more interesting than I thought that would work, or that's a new one. Have something that's a bit more you. But I think sometimes I think Steph Broadbridge has been saying this recently, but the job is not to kill the hardest. The job is to be someone's favorite comic.
Yeah.
I think Alex Milinkovic said that to me as well. Like you should be. I would much rather do a gig to 50 people and have 10 people leave going, I fucking loved that, and 40 going, not for me, than having all 50 go, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Because, I just don't think... That's not... Again, it's kind of the cruise ship thing, right? Like, if you just want to do the job, you can do that. That's not really what I want to do.
Yep.
So I think sometimes you have the joke, it's like, it doesn't always work, but when it does work, it works really well, and it works for the right kind of person. I'm kind of open to it. Mm-hmm. But also, I think, maybe try and fix it.
So I guess it's like 7:15 now.
Okay, cool.
And you need to be somewhere soon.
Yeah, I'm doing a hot 5 at Sit Down Comedy Club, and then a tight 7 at Good Chat Comedy Club, because things are going pretty great. So,
damn.
Yeah, I know. This could be you one day. Maybe very soon.
I'll keep manifesting.
Yeah, I see the vision board. With an egg timer next to the Good Chat Comedy Club sticker.
So I guess besides the 5 minutes at the Paddo, what's next for you in comedy?
So the next show that I'm doing is I'm doing the festivals: Perth, Melbourne, Sydney. I've tried to get into like Brisbane and Gold Coast, some of those more sort of like curated ones. I don't know if I'll get onto them, but that'd be nice. I'd like to really like kind of hone the show and come out. I've never had a show that's felt more than the sum of its parts, and that's what I really want that. I want like a today I'm going to tell you about this thing, or I want you to know this about me, or something. Up until now, they have just been collections of jokes, which is fine. That's all I've ever really tried to do, but I would love to just have a bit of a bigger arc or something. I've never done that before. That's probably the next big thing. Other than that, like the podcast is going well. Love doing Flog Cabin with Andrew and Dan, and that is we're kind of doing different stuff for that. We're doing like an end of year gala in Sydney, which will be fun.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So that's always good. And then, I don't know, I'm thinking about maybe... I've been listening to a lot of Daniel Kitson recently. Do you know anything about Daniel Kitson?
No, not really.
He's a British comic, like huge kind of cult following. No social media, doesn't do any interviews, like super reclusive. But he won the Perrier in Edinburgh at the Fringe in like... I think it was either 2001 or 2005, like quite a long time ago. And since then, he's been doing a lot of really sort of different approaches to comedy, a lot of storytelling shows, a lot of more kind of experimental stuff. I saw him this year in Sydney. It was one of my favorite things I've ever seen. It's called Collaborator. And it was in the round, and you go in, and when you walk in, there's a big pile of scripts in the middle of the room. There's like 180 scripts. And then we all walk in, and we sit in the different stands in the round, and he comes in and he kind of like walks around the scripts and he talks. And this is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he goes, I hate crowd participation. I think it's exploitative. I think it's lazy. And I've written a play about it. And the play has 180 parts. And he hands scripts out to everyone in the audience. We all had manuscripts. 180. It was 180 speaking parts and 50 non-speaking roles. And he basically went through the play with us, where he was the main character and everyone had a line. And like my line was on the 112th page, and I had 2 lines highlighted or whatever. And it was just so great. It was so fun and different. And so I've been really obsessed with him recently, and he's got a whole bunch of stuff on like, not Audible, Bandcamp. A lot of his like comedy shows are just recorded on Bandcamp. Mm-hmm. He's got some stuff on Vimeo. And it's kind of in that sort of like where comedy and theatre meet, one-man show sort of stuff. So I kind of have an idea for a storytelling show I'd really love to do, which would be really, really different from anything I've done before. But I think at a Fringe or something, just like a kind of a clean set. That's something I'd really love to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool.
And where can people follow you?
Follow me at Tom Witcombe Comedy on Instagram, and listen to the Flog Cabin podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Mm-hmm. That's probably it.
Yeah, sweet.
Cool.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.